The discovery. The morning sun cast long shadows across the obsidian peaks as Elara Steel began what she knew would be her final climb on Teral Luna. Tomorrow, she would leave for the Interplanetary Rescue Corps Academy on Mars, beginning a new chapter of her life far from the wild beauty of her home planet. At 22, Elara had become legendary in the settlement of Crestfall for her climbing abilities. The mountains had been her playground since childhood, their jagged black glass surfaces and hidden caves more familiar to her than the sterile corridors of the colony buildings below. Just one more adventure, she whispered to herself as she adjusted her pack and began the ascent along the eastern ridge. The path was challenging but familiar, winding through groves of crystal pines whose translucent needles caught the morning light like tiny prisms. Her parents had warned her about increased dragon activity in the region. The great reptilian creatures were establishing new territories for the mating season, but Elara had always respected the ancient beasts. Unlike some colonists who saw them as threats to be eliminated, she understood they were the true inhabitants of this world. 3 hours into her climb, as she navigated a particularly treacherous section of the ridge, an unusual sound stopped her cold. It wasn't the familiar whistle of wine through the rocks or the chirping of the native shrills. This was something else entirely, a high-pitched crying that seemed to echo from somewhere deep within the mountain. Following the sound, Elara discovered a narrow crevice she had never noticed before, hidden behind an outcropping of volcanic glass. The crying grew louder as she approached, and her heart began to race. Something was trapped inside, something that sounded desperate and afraid. Without hesitation, she secured her climbing rope and rappelled down into the dark fissure. Her headlamp illuminated the rocky walls as she descended, the crying growing clearer with each foot. At the bottom of the crevice, in a small cavern barely large enough for her to crouch in, she found the source of the sound. A baby dragon, no larger than a house cat, lay trapped beneath a fallen rock. Its scales were a brilliant emerald green, and its eyes, larger than any adult dragon she had ever seen, were filled with tears that sparkled like jewels in her headlamp's beam. The creature's left wing was pinned, clearly injured, and it cried out again when it saw her. Elara's breath caught in her throat. In all her years exploring these mountains, she had never seen a dragon this young. The hatchling couldn't be more than a few days old, its scales still soft and its movements clumsy. It should have been safe in its nest, not trapped alone in this hidden cavern. "Hey there, little one," she whispered softly, keeping her voice gentle despite her racing heart. "What happened to you?" The baby dragon stopped crying at the sound of her voice, tilting its small head to study her with those impossibly large eyes. For a moment, neither moved. Then, as if understanding that she meant no harm, the hatchling let out a softer sound, not quite a purr, but something that spoke of trust despite its pain. Carefully, very carefully, Elara examined the situation. The rock pinning the dragon's wing wasn't too large, but it was wedged in such a way that she would need to be precise to avoid causing more injury. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "Help those in need, even if they have scales and breathe fire." "Okay, sweetheart," she murmured, pulling on her climbing gloves. "This might hurt a little, but I'm going to get you free." An unexpected bond. Working with the patience her mother had taught her in the medical facility, Elara carefully maneuvered the rock away from the baby dragon's wing. The creature whimpered softly but didn't try to bite or scratch her, seeming to understand that she was trying to help. When the wing was finally free, Elara could see the damage wasn't as severe as she had feared. The membrane was torn in one place, and the tiny bones appeared bruised but not broken. With gentle hands, she lifted the hatchling from the rocky debris. The baby dragon was surprisingly warm to the touch, its body temperature much higher than any earth animal she had ever handled. Its heart beat rapidly against her palm, and she could feel the slight vibration that would one day become the powerful rumble of an adult dragon's breathing. "There we go," she whispered, cradling the creature against her chest. "You're safe now." But even as she spoke the words, Elara realized the complexity of the situation. This wasn't like rescuing a lost hiker or treating an injured colonist. This was a dragon, a member of the species that most humans on Teral Luna viewed with fear and suspicion. And somewhere in these mountains, this baby's parents were probably searching frantically for their missing offspring. The hatchling seemed to sense her uncertainty. It looked up at her with those enormous eyes and made a soft sound that was almost like a question. Then, to her amazement, it began to purr, a sound so gentle and trusting that it melted her heart completely. "You're hungry, aren't you?" she said, noticing how the creature's tiny ribs showed beneath its scales. "How long have you been trapped down here?" From her pack, she pulled out one of her emergency nutrition bars. It wasn't dragon food, but it was better than nothing. She broke off a small piece and offered it to the hatchling, who sniffed it cautiously before taking a tentative bite. The baby dragon's eyes widened with delight, and it quickly devoured the offered morsel before looking hopefully for more. Elara couldn't help but smile. "Slow down, little one. You'll make yourself sick." As she fed the creature small pieces of the nutrition bar, Elara noticed something remarkable. The hatchling's injured wing was already showing signs of healing. The torn membrane was beginning to knit itself back together, and the bruising was fading. Dragons, she realized, must heal much faster than humans. "What am I going to do with you?" she asked aloud, gently stroking the creature's head. The scales were incredibly soft, almost like silk, and the baby dragon closed its eyes contentedly at her touch. The answer came to her gradually. She couldn't just leave the hatchling here, not when it was still too young to fend for itself. But she also couldn't take it back to Crestfall. The colonists would panic, and some would undoubtedly want to harm it. The only option was to find its family. "All right, little one," she said, carefully placing the dragon inside her jacket where it would be warm and secure. "Let's get you home." The hatchling seemed to understand, snuggling against her chest with a contented sigh. As Elara began the careful climb back up to the surface, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was going to change everything, not just for her, but for the entire relationship between humans and dragons on Teral Luna. The baby dragon remained quiet during the ascent, occasionally poking its head out to look around with curiosity rather than fear. When they finally emerged into the sunlight, the creature blinked rapidly, its scales shimmering like emeralds in the bright rays. "Now," Elara said, looking around at the vast expanse of the Obsidian Mountains, "how do we find your family?" As if in answer to her question, a distant roar echoed across the peaks, deep, powerful, and filled with what sounded like desperate grief. The baby dragon's head snapped up, and it let out a high-pitched cry in response. The answering roar was closer this time, and Elara felt her heart begin to pound. Somewhere in these mountains, a very large, very worried dragon parent was searching for its missing child. The mother's arrival. The roars grew steadily closer, each one more desperate than the last. Elara stood on a rocky outcropping, holding the baby dragon gently while scanning the sky. The hatchling had become increasingly excited, chirping and crying out in response to what could only be its parents' calls. "It's okay," Elara whispered, as much to calm herself as the baby. "We're going to reunite you with your family." But even as she spoke, fear crept into her heart. Adult dragons were massive creatures, easily the size of the colony's transport vehicles, with teeth like swords and breath hot enough to melt the obsidian rocks. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, to get as far away as possible before the parent arrived. The baby dragon, however, seemed to sense her fear. It looked up at her with those trusting eyes and made a soft, reassuring sound, almost as if it were trying to tell her that everything would be all right. A shadow passed overhead, and Elara looked up to see a sight that took her breath away. A magnificent dragon, its scales a deeper emerald than its offspring's, circled above them. The creature was enormous, its wingspan easily 30 feet across, and its eyes blazed with fierce intelligence and unmistakable worry. The mother dragon, for there was no doubt that's what it was, landed on a ridge about 50 yards away. The impact shook the ground beneath Elara's feet, and loose rocks tumbled down the mountainside. The great beast lowered its massive head, golden eyes fixed on the tiny human holding her precious child. For a moment that seemed to last forever, dragon and human simply stared at each other. Elara could feel the power radiating from the creature, could see the barely controlled desperation in its posture. One wrong move, she realized, and she would be incinerated in an instant. The baby dragon chose that moment to cry out joyfully, struggling to free itself from Elara's jacket. The sound seemed to break the spell. The mother dragon's head lifted, and she took a step forward, her massive claws leaving deep gouges in the rocky ground. "It's okay," Elara called out, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I found your baby trapped in a crevice. The wing was injured, but it's healing well." She had no idea if the dragon could understand her words, but something in her tone seemed to register. The great creature tilted its head, studying her with an intelligence that was almost human-like. Slowly, carefully, Elara began to walk toward the dragon, holding the hatchling securely but visibly. Each step felt like it might be her last, but the baby dragon's excited chirping gave her courage. When she was about 20 feet away, the mother dragon lowered herself to the ground, bringing her massive head down to Elara's level. This close, Elara could see every detail of the magnificent creature, the intricate patterns of her scales, the golden flecks in her enormous eyes, the scars that spoke of a long life in these harsh mountains. "Here's your baby," Elara whispered, extending her arms. The mother dragon's response shocked her to her core. Instead of immediately snatching her offspring away, the great creature gently touched Elara's forehead with the tip of her snout. The touch was warm, gentle, and somehow conveyed a depth of gratitude that no words could express. Then, with movements surprisingly delicate for such a massive creature, the mother dragon carefully took her baby in her mouth, lifting the hatchling to safety on her back between her powerful shoulders. But instead of flying away immediately, the dragon remained still, watching Elara with those intelligent golden eyes. The baby dragon poked its head up from its mother's back and chirped happily, as if saying goodbye. What happened next would be talked about in Crestfall for generations to come. The mother dragon reached down and, with one careful claw, scratched something into the hard obsidian rock at Elara's feet. Then she spread her magnificent wings, creating a wind that nearly knocked Elara off balance, and took to the sky. As the dragons disappeared over the peaks, Elara looked down at the markings in the stone. They formed a complex pattern, almost like a map, with one section that seemed to show a pathway through the mountains she had never seen before. Understanding and trust. Elara knelt beside the scratched markings for a long time, running her fingers over the precise lines carved into the obsidian. The pattern was too complex to be random, too purposeful to be meaningless. The mother dragon had been trying to communicate something, but what? As she studied the markings more closely, pieces began to fall into place. The curved lines resembled the mountain ridges she knew so well, and the intersecting patterns looked like pathways or tunnels. But there was one section that didn't match anything she had ever seen, a deep valley hidden behind the northern peaks, marked with symbols that seemed to pulse with meaning. "She's showing me something," Elara whispered to herself. But what? The answer came with a distant sound, not a roar this time, but something like singing. Multiple dragon voices, harmonizing in a complex melody that seemed to echo from the very heart of the mountains. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, unlike anything she had ever heard. Following the crude map scratched into the stone, Elara began to make her way toward the northern peaks. The path was treacherous, requiring all her climbing skills, but something urged her forward. The dragon songs grew stronger as she climbed, and she began to realize that they were not random vocalizations but a form of communication, a language as complex and meaningful as any human tongue. After 2 hours of difficult climbing, she reached the ridge shown in the dragon's map. What she saw on the other side took her breath away completely. Hidden in a massive valley, invisible from the colony and protected by towering peaks on all sides, was a dragon settlement. Dozens of the magnificent creatures moved through the valley, some tending to what appeared to be gardens of crystalline plants, others caring for young, and still others engaged in activities that looked remarkably like farming. "They're not just intelligent," Elara breathed, watching as one dragon carefully tended to a grove of crystal pines. "They're civilized." As she watched, she began to understand what the mother dragon had been trying to show her. The dragons weren't just animals defending territory, they were a society, a culture, a people with their own ways of life. And they had been sharing this planet with humans for 30 years without the colonists ever realizing the truth. Movement caught her eye, and she saw the mother dragon she had met earlier approaching through the valley. On her back rode the baby dragon, now healed and healthy, its wing fully functional. They were heading toward what appeared to be a central meeting area where other dragons had gathered. But Elara wasn't the only one who had made a discovery. As she watched, she saw something that made her heart race with excitement and fear. Other humans were in the valley, not colonists from Crestfall, but people she didn't recognize, living peacefully among the dragons. One of them, a woman with silver hair and weathered hands, looked up and spotted Elara on the ridge. Instead of alarm, her face showed recognition and something that looked like relief. She spoke to one of the dragons, who turned to look at Elara with the same intelligence she had seen in the mother dragon's eyes. The great creature spread its wings and took flight, landing gracefully on the ridge beside Elara. Up close, she could see that this dragon was ancient, its scales bearing the patina of countless years, its eyes holding wisdom that seemed to span centuries. "You helped one of ours," the dragon said, and Elara nearly fell off the ridge in shock. The voice was deep, resonant, and unmistakably real. Dragons could speak. Not only could they speak, but they could speak the human language. "You can talk," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have always been able to talk," the dragon replied gently. "The question is whether humans are ready to listen. Your actions today suggest that perhaps some are." The baby dragon she had rescued suddenly appeared, having flown up from the valley on its newly healed wings. It landed on her shoulder with a joyful chirp, nuzzling her cheek affectionately. "She has claimed you as family," the ancient dragon observed with what Elara could swear was amusement. "That is not something that happens lightly among our kind." "I don't understand," Elara said, gently petting the baby dragon's head. "Why haven't you revealed yourselves to the colony? Why let us think you were just animals?" The ancient dragon's expression grew sad. "Because most of your people see us as threats to be eliminated, resources to be harvested. We have watched the hunting parties, seen the traps, witnessed the destruction of our nesting grounds. We chose to remain hidden to survive. But some humans know about you," Elara said, thinking of the silver-haired woman in the valley. "A few. Those who, like you, showed compassion first and asked questions later. Those who proved they could be trusted with the truth. A new beginning." Over the following hours, Elara learned truths that would change her understanding of Teral Luna forever. The dragons had been watching the human colony since its establishment, learning their language, studying their customs, and carefully evaluating their intentions. They had saved human lives more than once, subtly guiding lost travelers away from dangerous areas and preventing accidents that would have been attributed to luck or coincidence. The ancient dragon, who introduced himself as Korath, explained that the dragon community had been debating for years whether to reveal themselves to the humans. Some argued for contact, believing that cooperation would benefit both species. Others, traumatized by the hunting parties and the destruction of their sacred sites, advocated for driving the humans away entirely. "Your rescue of little Lyra here," Korath said, gesturing to the baby dragon who hadn't left Elara's side, "has tipped the balance. You showed mercy to a defenseless child of our kind, expecting nothing in return. That is the mark of a person who can be trusted." The silver-haired woman Elara had seen in the valley approached them. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist who had been studying with the dragons for the past 5 years after her own encounter with an injured dragon had led to this hidden world. "The dragons have been waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves," Dr. Chen explained. "They needed to be sure that humans were ready for the truth, that we could accept them as equals rather than seeing them as conquerors or resources." Elara looked around at the hidden valley, at the peaceful coexistence between the few humans and the dragon community, and felt a weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She was supposed to leave for the Interplanetary Rescue Corps tomorrow, but how could she leave now, knowing what she knew? "What happens next?" she asked. Korath considered the question carefully. "That depends on you, Elara Steel. Your parents are known to us, they have always spoken against the hunting parties, always advocated for peaceful coexistence. They would be good ambassadors for our first contact with your colony. But the decision of when and how to reveal ourselves must be made carefully, added Dr. Chen. Too fast, and we risk panic and violence. Too slow, and more of both our peoples may die from misunderstanding. The baby dragon, Lyra, chirped softly and looked up at Elara with those trusting eyes. In that moment, Elara realized that her life had been leading to this point all along. All her years of climbing, of learning to read the mountains, of developing a deep respect for the wild creatures of Teral Luna, it had all been preparation for this moment. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "The academy can wait. This is more important." Korath nodded approvingly. "Wisdom beyond your years. But we would not ask you to sacrifice your dreams entirely. The skills you would learn at the academy, rescue techniques, interspecies communication, crisis management, all of these would serve our cause well. Perhaps a year with us first, learning our ways, preparing for the challenges ahead." And so began the most remarkable year of Elara's life. She moved between the Hidden Valley and Crestfall, gradually introducing the idea of true dragon intelligence to her parents and a select few trusted colonists. She learned the dragon language, mastered the art of communicating with the great creatures, and developed protocols for peaceful first contact. The baby dragon Lyra became her constant companion, growing stronger and more intelligent each day. Through her, Elara learned to see the world through dragon eyes, to understand their deep connection to the planet, their complex social structures, and their genuine desire for peace. When the time finally came for the official first contact between the dragons and the human colony, it was Elara who served as the bridge between two worlds. Standing before the assembled colonists of Crestfall, with Lyra perched on her shoulder and Korath beside her, she told the story of how a crying baby dragon had changed everything. The revelation wasn't without its challenges. Some colonists were afraid, others were skeptical, and a few were openly hostile. But the overwhelming response was wonder and curiosity. The dragons' willingness to share their knowledge of the planet, their advanced understanding of sustainable living, and their offers of mutual cooperation quickly won over most of the colony. The hunting parties stopped immediately. The sacred dragon sites were protected. And slowly, carefully, a new kind of society began to emerge on Teral Luna, one where dragons and humans worked together, learned from each other, and built a future that neither could have achieved alone. Years later, when Elara finally did join the Interplanetary Rescue Corps, she brought with her a unique perspective and a small dragon companion who had grown into a magnificent creature but never forgot the human who had saved her life. Together, they pioneered new techniques for interspecies rescue operations, spreading the message of cooperation and understanding to human colonies throughout the galaxy. But it all began with a single act of compassion, a young woman who heard a crying baby and chose to help, regardless of what species it belonged to. That moment of choice, high in the obsidian mountains of Teral Luna, became the foundation for a new age of peace and understanding between two intelligent species. And sometimes, late at night when the twin moons cast their glow over the integrated settlements where dragons and humans lived in harmony, Elara would look up at the stars and remember that one moment when everything changed. The moment she chose compassion over fear, and in doing so, opened the door to a future brighter than either species could have imagined alone. The end.